A blizzard traps a silent king in his own mansion, and the new maid is the only one who speaks his language. She doesn't scream. She signs. She doesn't run. She pulls something shocking that stops a kill shot and flips the power in one breath. Now he keeps her close, but someone inside wants her gone, and a cruel uncle smiles like a friend. The world thinks he's weak because he can't hear. They don't see the way he reads lips, hands, and lies. She's forced to spy to save her brother. He's ready to burn the city to save her heart. A hidden drug from his past, a deep-fake betrayal, a midnight abduction. Every secret points to blood. When the rooftop showdown comes, she stands between his rage and the man he could be. And if he chooses to hear for the first time, will the first word be her voice? Or a warning? What did she really pull that night? And who inside his house wants her dead before he learns the truth? The winter wind howled against the mansion's windows as Greta paced the luxurious guest room, her uniform skirt swishing with each turn. The events of the night replayed in her mind like a fever dream. The flash of the alarm, the thunder of gunfire, and most of all, those intense moments with Leandro Vitale behind the marble pillar. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her clothes, still pristine despite their mad dash through the maintenance corridors. The room they'd given her was bigger than her entire apartment, with thick carpets and heavy silk drapes that couldn't quite muffle the sound of armed men patrolling outside. She sank onto the edge of the king-size bed, fingers absently tracing the intricate pattern on the duvet. The mattress was soft enough to swallow her whole, but sleep felt impossible. Not with the weight of Leandro's final command hanging in the air, until I find the leak. Those words, signed with precise, elegant movements, had sent a chill down her spine. Not from fear of him, though God knew she probably should be scared of the deaf Don who ruled his empire through calculated silence and strategic violence. No, what frightened her was how easily she'd fit into this deadly dance. A knock at the door made her jump. 2 sharp raps, then silence. Greta's heart hammered as she approached, remembering the security protocol they'd drilled into her during orientation. "Yes," she called, keeping to the side of the doorframe. "Ms. Hale." A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "Mr. Vitale requests your presence in his study." Greta checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. The blizzard still raged outside, transforming the estate grounds into a white wasteland. "Now. Immediately." The corridor outside was eerily quiet, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting as the security woman, Martinez, according to her discreet name tag, led the way. They passed armed guards at regular intervals, their faces impassive but eyes alert. The charity gala guests had all been moved to the East Wing, leaving this section of the mansion feeling like a separate world. Martinez stopped at a heavy wooden door and nodded once before taking up position beside it. Greta smoothed her hands down her skirt one final time, took a deep breath, and knocked. The study was a masterpiece of old-world craftsmanship meeting cutting-edge technology. Wood-paneled walls housed hidden screens, and what looked like antique sconces contained state-of-the-art security sensors. Leandro stood at the window, his broad shoulders outlined against the swirling snow beyond. He turned at her entrance, and Greta's breath caught. He'd shed his formal jacket, and his crisp white shirt emphasized the power in his frame. His face bore the kind of beauty that belonged on Renaissance statues, all clean lines and perfect angles. But it was his eyes that held her, dark, intelligent, and missing nothing. "You sign well," he signed, movements precise and elegant. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother was deaf," Greta replied, her hands forming the words with the fluidity of long practice. "She taught me from childhood." A slight narrowing of his eyes was the only reaction, but she felt the weight of his assessment. He moved to his desk, every motion controlled and purposeful, and gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing it. "Tell me about tonight," he commanded, settling into his own chair. "Every detail." Greta took a steadying breath. "I was in the kitchen when I saw the strobe alarm. It caught my attention because the pattern was wrong. 3 quick flashes, pause, 2, slow. Standard protocol is 2, quick, pause, 3, slow." Leandro's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened slightly on the desk. "Continue." I followed the signal down the service corridor. The security camera near the door was dark. Her hands moved steadily through the signs. "When I saw you, I didn't think, just reacted to the sound of the gunshot." "You recognized the sound of a suppressed weapon?" "My brother." She hesitated, then continued. He was military. I know the difference. Leandro studied her for a long moment, his gaze so intense she could almost feel it like a physical touch. Finally, he signed, "Someone tried to kill me tonight. Someone with inside knowledge of our security systems, camera layouts, and my movements." Greta's throat felt dry. "The leak you mentioned." "Yes." His hand sliced through the air with controlled violence. "And you, Miss Hale, appeared at exactly the right moment to save my life." "You think I'm involved?" The signs came sharp and fast before she could stop herself. "I tackled you out of the line of fire." "Which makes you either my savior," he signed, rising from his chair with fluid grace, "or a very clever plant who's playing a long game." Greta stood as well, refusing to be loomed over. "I'm not your enemy." "We'll see." He circled the desk, moving with the predatory elegance that had earned him his reputation. "You'll remain close where I can watch you. Your duties will be exclusively to me, serving my meals, attending my meetings, anticipating my needs. And if I refuse?" His smile was sharp enough to cut. "The roads are blocked by ice, Miss Hale. The phones are down. And there are questions about your brother's debts that need answering." Greta's hands clenched at her sides. He'd done his homework. Of course he had. She thought of Danny, struggling to keep his head above water after his discharge, of the loans that had seemed too good to be true. "Do we understand each other?" Leandro signed, close enough now that she could see the faint scar along his jaw. Greta lifted her chin. "Perfectly," she signed back, matching his intensity. "I'll help you find your leak, but I'm not your prisoner, Mr. Vitale." His dark eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. "We'll see about that too, Miss Hale." Dawn hadn't yet touched the frozen landscape when Martinez knocked on Greta's door. The guard's expression remained neutral as he escorted her through the silent halls of the Vitale estate, but his hand never left his weapon. The residence wing felt different in the pre-morning darkness. Thick carpets muffled their footsteps, and security lights cast long shadows across priceless artwork. Leandro waited in a private sitting room, already immaculate in a charcoal suit despite the hour. He looked up from a tablet as she entered, his intense focus making her pulse quicken. "Walk me through last night," he signed, movements crisp. "Every detail from when you first entered the service corridor." Greta took a steadying breath. The air was cooler there. The heating vents were operating at lower power. "I smelled gun oil before I heard anything." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Gun oil?" "Faint, but distinct, near the third maintenance panel." Her hands moved confidently through the signs. The vent above the alcove was vibrating differently than the others. Someone had adjusted the airflow. Leandro circled her slowly, studying her face. The threshold of the security door. Grit on the right side, road salt and snow, tracked in recently. The pattern was wrong for staff shoes. He nodded once, satisfaction flickering across his features. "You notice things others miss." "I have to," she signed, then added, "People tend to ignore the help, especially when they look like me." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Their mistake." He moved to the window, surveying the snow-locked grounds. "You'll remain with me until the road's clear. I need your eyes, your hands for translation, and your oversight of the household. Your men won't like that." "My men don't have to like it." His signs were sharp and decisive. "Bastian will object the loudest. Let him." As if summoned by his name, Bastian Corso appeared in the doorway. The enforcer's cold gaze swept over Greta before focusing on Leandro. "The kitchen staff is assembled for inspection." Leandro nodded and gestured for Greta to follow. As they walked, she studied how he moved, always keeping clear sightlines, positioning himself to feel vibrations through floors and walls. He used every sense available to him, and she found herself mapping the space the same way. The kitchen inspection revealed more than just food preparation. Leandro touched surfaces, checked sightlines, noted which staff met his eyes and which looked away. Greta translated his questions and commands into speech, watching how the others reacted to her new role. Over breakfast in his office, Greta served coffee while security footage played on wall screens. "The camera failure wasn't random," she signed after setting down his cup. "The timing, the strobe pattern, it's too precise." "An inside job," his mouth tightened. "I know." "Someone who understands your security intimately." She hesitated, then added, "And your routines." Leandro's dark eyes met hers. "Keep watching. Tell me what you see." Throughout the day, Greta learned his patterns, how he tracked movement through reflections, how his fingers brushed surfaces to read vibrations, how he positioned himself in rooms to maximize his awareness. She also noticed how others dismissed her, averting their eyes from her curves, treating her like furniture in her uniform. But Leandro watched her. Every time she caught a detail others missed, every time she anticipated his needs, his gaze grew more intent. Evening brought chaos. 2 guards dragged in a struggling man, the delivery driver who'd brought supplies just before the storm hit. They threw him to his knees on the office carpet while Bastian pulled up security footage on a tablet. "He's connected to the attackers," Bastian signed rapidly. "And look at this." The screen showed Greta at the kitchen door speaking to the driver during the storm's early hours. The timestamp matched when the first cameras went dark. "She let them in," one guard growled. "She has to go." "She's a security risk," Bastian signed, eyes hard. "We can't trust her." Leandro held up one hand, silencing them all. His gaze locked onto Greta, searching her face. She met his stare steadily, refusing to look away. "You don't leave," he signed directly to her. "You stay where I can see you." "Boss," Bastian protested, but Leandro cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Move a cot into the anteroom off my suite," he commanded. "Post additional guards. Miss Hale remains close." Greta felt the weight of his decision settle over her like a blanket, both protection and prison. There would be no escape now, no slipping away in the night. But as she watched Leandro's powerful hands shape his orders, saw the dangerous grace of his movements, she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. The guards dragged the driver away while Bastian arranged for her belongings to be moved. Through it all, Leandro's attention never wavered from her face, as if he could read every thought behind her eyes. "Why trust me?" she signed when they were alone. His smile was slight but genuine. "Because you don't flinch. From the danger, from my silence, from their judgment, you stand your ground. That's worth watching closely." The sun had long since set, and snow still fell beyond the windows, sealing them all together in this dangerous game of trust and suspicion. As Greta followed a maid to collect her things, she felt Leandro's gaze following her every step. Protection or prison, she was his now, at least until they found the truth buried in the ice and shadows of the Vitali estate. The morning light barely touched the chandeliers when the first flicker came. Greta watched the crystal drops shiver, casting zebra-striped shadows across Leandro's mahogany desk. 1 second, 2, 3. The backup generators hummed to life with mechanical precision, but those precious moments of darkness spoke volumes. "That wasn't an accident," she signed to Leandro, who stood at the window, his profile sharp against the winter morning. "Someone's testing your defenses." He nodded once, fingers moving in response. "Local grid manipulation. They're getting bolder." Throughout the morning, contractors filed through the office, security consultants, electrical specialists, communications experts. Greta stood at Leandro's shoulder, her hands dancing through the air as she translated their technical jargon. She noticed how he positioned himself, always maintaining clear sightlines, never letting anyone block his view of exits and entrances. During a particularly heated discussion about upgrading the perimeter sensors, 3 different specialists began talking at once. Without missing a beat, Greta grabbed her laser pointer and note cards, creating a visual system that let Leandro track each conversation thread. Red dot for security concerns, green for electrical, blue for communications. His eyes flickered between the points of light, never revealing that without her system, he would have missed crucial details. "You adapt quickly," he signed during a brief break, his gloved hand brushing against hers as she passed him a fresh coffee. "So do you," she replied, fighting the shiver that ran through her when his fingertip traced the word trust across her knuckle. The chemistry between them built in quiet moments throughout the day. A shared glance over building schematics, his hand at the small of her back as they navigated a crowded hallway, the brush of shoulders while reviewing security footage. Each touch felt deliberate, measured, like moves in a chess game neither of them had agreed to play. In the afternoon, while Leandro met with his captains, Greta slipped down to the pantry to check inventory. The ancient wall phone rang, a harsh sound in the quiet space. She answered out of habit, expecting the produce supplier. "Watch him carefully," a digitally altered voice commanded. "Keep observing the silent king." Her blood ran cold, but she kept her voice steady. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows about Jimmy's debts. Your brother's fingers are such delicate things. It would be a shame if he lost them one by one." Greta's hand tightened on the receiver, but she refused to let fear show in her voice. "What do you want?" "Keep watching. Report when we call tomorrow. Noon sharp." The line went dead. Greta grabbed a sticky note, wrote down the time, and headed straight for Leandro's office. She found him alone, reviewing camera feeds on his multiple monitors. She placed the note on his desk without ceremony or self-pity. His dark eyes scanned the message, then lifted to her face. "They're using Jimmy," she signed, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands. "They want information about you." Leandro's expression hardened. "Tell me everything they said, word for word." She recounted the conversation while he watched her hands move through the air. When she finished, he stood and moved around the desk until they were face to face. "Do you trust me?" he signed. "Yes." No hesitation. "Then we set a trap." His fingers moved with deadly precision. "Tomorrow at noon, you answer their call. Bastion will run a trace. We'll have cameras on every angle." Through the rest of the evening, they planned the operation. Bastion arrived with technical equipment, his suspicious gaze softening slightly when he saw how Greta and Leandro worked in seamless tandem. They synchronized movements like dancers, anticipating each other's needs without words. As midnight approached, Greta retired to her cot in the anteroom. The door remained cracked open, both for security and because Leandro insisted on maintaining visual contact. Through the gap, she could see him still working, the blue glow of his monitors pulsing like a technological heartbeat. She watched him move through his nighttime routine, checking camera feeds, reviewing reports, occasionally stopping to press his palm against the floor, reading vibrations that only he could interpret. His shoulders carried tension, but his movements remained fluid, controlled. The snow continued falling outside, turning the estate into an ivory prison, or perhaps a fortress. Greta wasn't sure anymore which it was, trap or sanctuary. She lay awake, counting heartbeats, watching the monitors glow paint shadows on the ceiling. Somewhere in the darkness, her brother slept, unaware of the threats against him. Somewhere, enemies plotted, testing defenses, probing for weaknesses. And here, in this quiet space, between safety and danger, she waited. The monitors breathed their blue light, marking time until noon tomorrow, when she would either help spring a trap or fall into one herself. Through the cracked door, she caught Leandro watching her. His hands moved in the dim light. "Sleep. I'm here." She nodded, allowing her eyes to close while keeping her other senses alert, a habit she'd already picked up from him. The monitors continued their rhythmic pulsing, a technological lullaby in this strange new world where silence spoke volumes and trust was measured in heartbeats and hand signals. The grandfather clock struck noon as Greta settled into the chair, her heart beating with each chime. The glass office felt like a fishbowl, winter light streaming through frosted windows. 2 cameras blinked red, one on her hands, another monitoring the estate gates. Leandro positioned himself to her left, casual but alert. The screen showed her face, allowing him to read her words. Bastion monitored equipment in the corner. The phone rang at noon. "Right on time," Greta answered steadily, signing each word. "You're learning our punctuality," the digitally altered voice crackled. "Just like your boss's pickiness about wine. That 82 Bordeaux he refused. Such a waste." Greta glanced at Leandro, whose jaw tightened. Or perhaps his navy tie last night that brought out his eyes. Insider details. Greta kept her voice level. "You seem well-informed. Prove my brother's alive." "Demanding. Check your phone." A recent photo appeared showing Jimmy at a cafe, unharmed, but with carefully positioned hands. Leandro signaled, "Ask about instructions." "What do you want me to do?" Greta asked. "Simple. When the Silent King leaves tonight, place a white towel in the second-floor window above the east garden." Leandro nodded once. Greta agreed. "Failure means consequences," warned the voice before disconnecting. Leandro signed. "The towel becomes our bait." Through the afternoon, sleep painted windows silver while Bastion distributed false information through selected channels. Dr. Margot Hart arrived to treat Leandro's arm wound. While she worked, Greta noticed an odd pattern in the doctor's files, glimpsing LV prenatal intervention before the screen locked. Leandro watched with sharp focus, tension evident between him and the doctor. Night fell. Security teams positioned themselves as Greta placed the towel at the window at 11:45. Leandro stood nearby as they waited. Movement flickered at the tree line. "Target spotted," Bastion reported, but the figure vanished before teams could respond. Back in his office, Leandro signed, "The leak is family." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere, Jimmy sat unwittingly in this betrayal game. Greta watched Leandro's reflection, aware her role had evolved beyond translator to confidant. They waited for the next move in this deadly game. The city stirred beneath a pink-streaked sky as the armored SUV cut through empty streets. Greta sat behind tinted windows, her presence technically against protocol. But Leandro had insisted, partly to show her his world, partly because he needed her particular skills. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the brightening horizon. Bastian drove while two other men flanked them in a second vehicle. Leandro's hands moved in the dim interior. "Watch the high points. Sound won't save us here." Greta nodded, understanding. While others relied on footsteps or voices for warning, she'd learned to read spaces differently, like Leandro did. Light, movement, the smallest disruption of dust or shadow could tell stories that sound never would. The SUV eased to a stop in shadow. Through the windshield, Greta studied the warehouse's facade. Shafts of early sunlight pierced broken windows, making dust motes dance like falling stars. Her eyes tracked upward, scanning methodically. There, the barest shift of glass on a catwalk. Most would have missed it, but Greta had spent years noticing things others overlooked. Instead of pointing directly at the hidden figure, which would alert them, she pulled out her small laser pointer and painted a dot beside the sniper's position. Leandro caught the signal instantly. His expression never changed, but his body tensed like a coiled spring. He signed rapid instructions to his men, positioning them with lethal precision. What followed was violence distilled to its purest form. Leandro moved like liquid shadow, each action calculated and devastating. The sniper never saw him coming. Other threats emerged from the warehouse depths, but Leandro's team cut through them with terrifying efficiency. Greta watched it all, her heart hammering but her hands steady. She'd known, intellectually, what Leandro was capable of. Seeing it was different. He killed with the same economy of movement he brought to everything else. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no mercy. It should have frightened her. Instead, she felt a complicated mix of awe and understanding. This was who he was, the man who could end lives without remorse, yet trusted her enough to watch his back. When it was over, they sat in the SUV's dim back seat while Bastian and the others secured the scene. Adrenaline still coursed through their veins, making everything sharper, more immediate. Leandro took her hands in his, studying the slight tremor in her fingers. Their eyes met. The air between them crackled with unspoken words. Then Leandro leaned forward, and Greta met him halfway. The kiss was everything they couldn't say aloud. Hunger and gratitude, trust and warning, a promise sealed in the taste of danger. His hands cradled her face, while hers gripped his lapels. For one endless moment, masks fell away and truth blazed between them. Then they separated, composure settling back like armor. By the time Bastian returned, they sat properly distanced, professional masks firmly in place. The drive back to the estate passed in charged silence. Late afternoon sun gilded the snow as they pulled through the gates. Inside Leandro's office, Greta knew it was time for her own truth. "I need to tell you something," she signed, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "About why I took this job." Leandro's expression remained neutral, but his attention sharpened. She explained about the calls, the threats against Jimmy, the mounting debts used as leverage, how a faceless voice had ordered her to take the maid position, to watch and report. "But I never intended harm." Her hands shaped, the words with fierce conviction. "That first night, when I saw the danger to you, I chose to protect, not betray." Leandro studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing her words against her actions, measuring truth against risk. Finally, he nodded. Not full trust, but enough to keep her close, enough to maintain the careful dance they'd begun. That night, sleep proved elusive. Greta lay on her cot in the anteroom, mind racing. The housekeeping tablet glowed softly as she followed a hunch, cross-referencing Dr. Hart's archive labels against decades of society news. The pattern that emerged sent chills down her spine. 30 years ago, a charity foundation run by someone named Ronaldo had specialized in prenatal fortifiers, medical supplements for expecting mothers. Around the same time, a private ledger showed substantial payments coinciding with Leandro's birth. Greta bookmarked the articles, determined to confront Hart when morning came. The doctor's carefully organized files suddenly seemed less about medical records and more about tracking an old sin, one that might explain why the most powerful man in the city had been born unable to hear. Outside, snow began falling again, adding another layer of silence to the night. In his room, Leandro's monitors cast their usual blue glow through the cracked door. Greta watched the light pulse, thinking of kisses tasting of gunpowder and hands that killed with precision, yet held her with such care. Dawn would bring new dangers, new questions. But for now she guarded his sleep and pieced together a puzzle 3 decades in the making, while the estate held its secrets close and winter wrapped them all in its cold embrace. The morning light filtered weakly through the basement windows of Dr. Hart's surgery room. Greta's hands trembled slightly as she laid out the documents on the pristine steel examination table, newspaper clippings, archived records, and payment logs that told a devastating story. "Look at the pattern," she signed, making sure both Leandro and Dr. Hart could see her hands. "The Ronaldo Foundation's prenatal program coincides exactly with your mother's pregnancy." Dr. Hart's normally steady hands shook as she picked up one of the yellowed articles. Her face had gone pale, the kind of white that spoke of old fears resurfacing. "The fortifier they provided," Greta continued. "I researched the chemical composition. It contained compounds known to cause hearing loss in developing fetuses." Leandro stood absolutely still, his face a mask of control. Only the slight tightening around his eyes betrayed any emotion as he studied the evidence. Dr. Hart sank into her chair, looking suddenly aged. "I suspected," the doctor signed, her movements jerky with suppressed emotion. "When you were small, the symptoms didn't match typical congenital patterns, but they threatened my family, my license. They made it clear silence was the only option." Leandro's response was swift and sharp. "No pity," he signed. "This isn't tragedy. This is ammunition." The surgery room's sterile lighting cast harsh shadows as they spent the next hours piecing together the full scope. The Ronaldo family's charitable program had been a cover for something far more calculated, a generation of carefully orchestrated medical manipulation. By late afternoon, the evidence was organized and secured. Leandro had it digitized and encrypted, adding each detail to what Greta now understood was a meticulously kept ledger of debts to be settled. Evening brought Don Benedetto Rinaldo to the estate's front doors. He arrived like a benevolent patriarch, all understated wealth and practiced charm. His suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair immaculate, his smile warm, but never reaching his eyes. "My dear boy," he greeted Leandro with practiced familiarity, though he knew perfectly well Leandro couldn't hear him. His gaze swept the foyer, landing on Greta with calculated interest. She stood at Leandro's right shoulder, wearing a simple black dress that marked her as staff while maintaining dignity. Ronaldo approached her, taking her hand with old-world courtesy. His finger traced her wrist in what appeared to be an avuncular gesture, but felt like ownership being asserted. Leandro's hands moved in precise, deliberate ASL, positioned so Ronaldo couldn't miss the message. "Mine." The single word carried weight, far beyond its simplicity. A claim, a warning, a promise of protection. The dining room gleamed with crystal and silver, the table set for an intimate party of 3. Ronaldo brought wine, a vintage that probably cost more than Greta's yearly salary. Each glass was poured with ceremony, the rich burgundy catching the light like blood. "I remember when your father hosted these dinners," Ronaldo said, making sure Leandro could read his lips. "You were such a serious child, already being shaped for leadership." The emphasis on shaped was subtle but unmistakable. Greta translated the conversation seamlessly, her hands dancing through the air as Ronaldo spoke of old times, family connections, shared history that carried poison barbs beneath its surface. "These troubles you're having now," Ronaldo offered between perfectly timed bites. "I have resources that could help, connections that could prove invaluable." Each offer of assistance felt like a snare waiting to be sprung. Leandro responded with careful courtesy, his signs translated by Greta, while his eyes never left Ronaldo's face. The meal proceeded like an elaborate dance, every movement choreographed, every word weighted with double meaning. At 11, they moved to the portico for Ronaldo's departure. His car idled in the circular drive, headlights cutting through the darkness. He clasped Leandro's shoulder in a paternal gesture that made Greta's skin crawl. As the taillights disappeared down the long drive, Leandro turned to Greta. His hands moved with cold precision. "If he touched your brother, there won't be a prison deep enough to hide him." The promise hung in the frosty air between them. Greta nodded, understanding the shift that had just occurred. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. Family, threatening family, old wounds bleeding fresh. They walked back inside together, their footsteps echoing in the marble foyer. The evening's perfectly orchestrated dinner had been a declaration of war, conducted with wine glasses instead of weapons. But they both knew the weapons would come later. The house settled around them, creaking with winter cold and decades of secrets. Leandro's security teams moved with heightened vigilance, aware that the quiet courtesy of the evening masked something far more dangerous brewing. In the library, Leandro poured 2 fingers of whiskey for each of them. They didn't need signs or words to communicate now. The shared understanding was clear in their eyes, in the way they moved in sync, in how they'd positioned themselves throughout the evening to guard each other's vulnerabilities. The amber liquid caught the firelight as they raised their glasses in silent acknowledgement. Tonight had changed everything. The game of cat and mouse, of leaked information and probing attacks, had evolved into something more primal. Ronaldo might have orchestrated Leandro's silence before birth, but he had inadvertently given him time to perfect other weapons: patience, observation, and the kind of cold precision that came from a lifetime of watching instead of hearing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the estate windows when the first lights flickered. 1 moment, then 2, before the power failed completely. Emergency lights bloomed like artificial dawn, casting everything in an otherworldly blue glow. Leandro's hand found Greta's wrist in the semi-darkness, pulling her toward the panic room as protocol demanded. The magnetic lock engaged with a decisive click behind them, sealing them into the fortified space designed to withstand anything short of a missile strike. The room hummed with backup systems, air filtration, surveillance monitors, emergency power, but with the main grid down, they were effectively cut off from the outside world. 3 hours, minimum, before the override protocols would release the door. In the blue-tinted quiet, stripped of the usual bustle of staff and soldiers, something shifted between them. The constant performance of Don and servant fell away, leaving just a man and woman in a contained space with nothing but truth between them. Leandro's hands moved in the dimness, signs flowing like water. "I never heard my mother laugh," he confessed, his expression raw in ways he never showed outside these walls. "She died when I was 15. Everyone talks about her laugh, how it could light up a room. I'll never know that sound." Greta watched his hands speak his pain, understanding how silence could be both shield and prison. "They mistake quiet for weakness," he continued, fingers precise even in confession. "As if volume equals power. They never learn. The quiet ones see everything." "The world has its own way of reducing people," Greta responded, voice low and steady in the hush. Her hands shaped the words as she spoke them, their private language of touch and vision. "They see my size, my uniform, and think they know everything about me. Too big, too common, too much." Leandro moved closer, one hand lifting to trace the curve of her cheek. His fingers spelled words across her skin with exquisite care. Beautiful, strong, mine. Each letter was a benediction, a promise written in touch instead of sound. Greta leaned into his hand, letting the warmth of his palm anchor her as his other hand continued its slow poetry across her shoulder, her collarbone, the sensitive hollow of her throat. Their first kiss was inevitable, as gravity, urgent yet achingly tender. They came together in the blue-lit darkness, hands speaking volumes in the spaces between breaths. Every touch was deliberate, every caress a conversation without sound. Clothes fell away like surrendered armor. Leandro mapped her body with reverent hands, writing praise across every curve and valley. Greta's fingers spelled desire along his spine, traced devotion over his heart. They made love with an intensity that transcended the need for words, communicating in gasps and trembles, in the arch of spine and clutch of hands. Their gazes locked and held, speaking promises too profound for any language. The emergency lights painted their skin in shifting patterns of shadow and glow. Time became fluid, measured only in heartbeats and shared breath. They wrote their own story, in touch and taste, in the silent poetry of bodies moving as one. When the door finally hissed open near dusk, reality crashed back in with brutal efficiency. They emerged to find the residence wing in calculated disarray. Drawers had been methodically rifled, their contents disturbed with surgical precision. Picture frames hung crooked, their backs obviously examined and replaced. Bastian burst in, face grim with news that couldn't wait. While the blackout had sealed Leandro and Greta in safety, someone had moved through the estate like a ghost, using the power failure as cover. They'd cloned Leandro's system token, a digital key that granted access to every locked door and secured file. "Show me the footage," Leandro demanded, hands sharp with tension. They gathered in his office, reviewing security feeds from multiple angles. Greta stood at his shoulder, studying each frame with the same attention to detail that had saved his life before. Something about the shadows caught her eye, a subtle wrongness in their geometry. "Wait," she signed, reaching to pause the playback. Look at how the light falls here and here. Her finger traced the inconsistent patterns. These shadows don't match the light sources. This footage has been altered. A deepfake overlay. Leandro's expression hardened as he processed the implications. Someone wasn't just stealing data. They were carefully constructing evidence to frame an insider. The question wasn't just who had access, but who stood to gain from redirecting suspicion. The clock on the wall read 10 p.m. as they gathered around the screen, studying the doctored footage, frame by frame. The estate hummed with renewed security sweeps, but the real threat wasn't physical anymore. It lived in digital shadows and manufactured evidence, in careful constructions designed to destroy trust from within. Greta's hand found Leandro's under the desk, their fingers intertwining in silent support. What had started as forced proximity had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a partnership forged in danger and sealed in trust. Whatever came next, they would face it together, speaking their own language of touch and truth in a world of manufactured lies. The deepfake revelation cast everything in a new light. Every security log, every camera feed, every digital record now had to be questioned. The enemy wasn't just inside the walls, they were rewriting reality itself, pixel by pixel, frame by frame. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Leandro's office, catching dust motes in golden shafts. 3 laptops displayed forensic analysis results, while Greta and a team of techs combed through data fragments. The missing system token had left digital breadcrumbs, all pointing to an impossible conclusion. Only 2 people could have accessed this, the lead tech signed, his movements sharp with tension. Don Vitale himself, or... He hesitated, glancing at the door. Bastian, Greta finished, her stomach sinking. On the screen, timestamps and access logs painted a damning picture. Leandro's face remained impassive, but Greta saw the slight tightening around his eyes. Bastian had been his right hand for years, the one person besides Greta he trusted to guard his blind spots. A junior analyst cleared his throat. Sir, there's more. He pulled up surveillance footage showing Bastian meeting with Marco De Luca, Ronaldo's notorious enforcer, behind the Blue Jay Cafe 3 days ago. The timestamp matched a period when Bastian had claimed to be checking warehouse security. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Guards shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward weapons. Loyalty lines were being redrawn in real time. Bastian burst in moments later, summoned by urgent text. His face darkened as he watched the cafe footage. That's not me, he insisted, voice rough. I was nowhere near there. Check the warehouse logs, check my phone GPS. Greta leaned closer to her screen, something nagging at her trained eye. The reflections in the cafe window didn't quite match the angle of the streetlight. And there, in the compression artifacts around Bastian's outline, a telltale shimmer that shouldn't exist. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, isolating frames, enhancing edges. The evidence mounted, inconsistent shadow angles, impossible light scatter, synthetic blur patterns. This was expert work, but it was fake. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from the blocked number that had been haunting her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The photo hit her like a physical blow, her brother Tommy tied to a chair, face bruised and swollen. A location pin dropped on an industrial district across town. The message below was simple. Come alone or he dies. Greta's mind raced. She couldn't tell Leandro directly. His men were watching too closely, and the mole would see any obvious communication. She needed to get word to someone she trusted, someone who could verify the location while she created a diversion. She scribbled a note in her neat handwriting. Token forge proves be innocent. Cafe vid fake. Check reflection angles. Going to check brother lead. Trust me. She folded it small and tight. I need coffee, she announced, standing. Several guards tensed, but Leandro gave a slight nod. They were used to her kitchen runs by now. The service corridor was cool and quiet. Greta moved with deliberate casualness toward the kitchen, where she knew Bastian often checked security between shifts. She just needed 5 seconds to pass him the note, to set the wheels in motion. A white van glided into the delivery bay, smooth and silent as a shark. 2 men in electrician uniforms stepped out, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who belonged there. Greta's instincts screamed danger, but before she could turn, they had her. One man's arm locked around her waist while the other pressed a cloth over her mouth. No sound escaped. They lifted her into the van with terrifying competence, the doors closing with barely a click. The hood came down over her eyes, plunging her world into darkness. The van started moving, each turn and bump etching itself into her memory. The air smelled of leather and gun oil. Back in his office, Leandro found the note tucked beneath his tablet. He read it once, then again. his extraordinary mind cataloging every implication. His body went absolutely still, like a predator scenting blood. The room around him hummed with activity, analysts still poring over footage, guards reporting positions, phones ringing with updates. But Leandro had entered that dangerous quiet space where rage met calculation. His hands moved with lethal precision as he signed to his closest guard. Lock down all exits. Full surveillance review of the delivery bay. Last 30 minutes. Find Bastion. The pieces were falling into place. The faked footage trying to divide his forces. The perfectly timed van. The way they'd known exactly when and where to grab her. This wasn't just about data or territory anymore. This was personal. His fingers brushed the note again, feeling the slight indentations of her handwriting. Greta had trusted him with the truth, even knowing she might not be able to deliver it herself. She'd chosen to protect Bastion's innocence, even as she walked into danger. The cameras would show him exactly what happened in that delivery bay. They would give him faces, plates, patterns to follow. But Leandro already knew who was behind this. The same man who had poisoned him before birth, who had spent decades weaving webs of control and coercion. Ronaldo had just made his biggest mistake. He'd taken someone Leandro considered his, someone who had proven her loyalty not through words but through actions, who had chosen truth over safety. The office bustled around him, but Leandro remained motionless at his desk, a statue carved from ice and fury. Every muscle, every nerve was coiled with potential energy, waiting to be unleashed. The next moves would require surgical precision. One wrong step could cost Greta her life. Cold tile bit into Greta's knees through her uniform skirt. The zip ties cut into her wrists and the hood's rough fabric scratched her face with every breath. Bleach fumes burned her nostrils, making her eyes water beneath the dark cloth. She focused on cataloging details. The echo of footsteps suggested a large room, maybe industrial. The floor's dampness meant recent cleaning. The hood ripped away suddenly, fluorescent light stabbing her eyes. As her vision adjusted, Don Benedetto Rinaldo's elegant figure came into focus. He wore a pristine white butcher's apron over his tailored suit, looking more like a sophisticated chef than a crime lord. "Ah, our resourceful little maid," his voice dripped with false warmth. "So much more useful than expected. Though I must say, finding someone of your proportion who could move quietly enough for service work was a challenge." Greta's cheek burned with humiliation, but she kept her expression neutral. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "You were always meant as leverage, dear." Ronaldo circled her like a shark. "The Silent King has such specific tastes, in staff, in security, in women. Once we saw how he watched you." He smiled. "Well, let's just say you became much more valuable than simple surveillance." A guard approached, holding something that made an electric crackle. The cattle prod sparked blue in the fluorescent light. "Demonstrate for our guest," Ronaldo commanded. The guard forced the prod into Greta's bound hands, letting it spark inches from her face. "Scared yet, fatty?" he sneered, leaning close enough that she could smell stale coffee on his breath. "Your beloved Leandro will come charging in like a bull when he learns what we could do to that soft flesh of yours." Ronaldo's voice hardened. "Though perhaps we'll send him a small sample first. Nothing says motivation like a charred heart." In that moment, Greta saw everything with crystal clarity. The wet floor, the exposed breaker panel, the guard's stance, weight shifted forward, cocky and careless. She moved in one fluid motion, twisting the prod's grip, stripping the leads with her thumbnails, and ramming the exposed wires into the breaker housing. Her other hand found the main bar and yanked it down. Electricity exploded across the wet floor. Bodies hit the ground, muscles seizing, the lights went wild, strobing and popping. Screams echoed off concrete walls. Greta was already moving. Zip ties snapped in the chaos. Her stockings provided just enough insulation on the wet floor. She stumbled toward the stairwell she'd glimpsed earlier, snatching up the dropped cattle prod. Blood trickled down her face from where she'd hit the floor, but adrenaline dulled the pain. The concrete stairs echoed with her footsteps as she climbed, using the prod like a cane to steady herself. Her legs burned, lungs heaving in the cold air. Below, she heard shouts and pounding feet. The roof access door took 3 solid kicks before it burst open. Sleety wind whipped her hair, stinging the cut on her scalp. The city spread out below, a maze of lights and shadows. Distant sirens wailed, but she couldn't tell how far. The wind distorted everything. Her hands shook as she pulled out the phone they hadn't bothered to take, trusting her apparent helplessness. The rooftop had a clear identification number painted in huge letters. She punched it into a text to the estate's emergency line, adding the cross streets she could see. An air handling unit provided minimal shelter from the wind and sleet. Greta pressed herself against it, trying to slow her breathing, to think. The prod wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. She tested her weight on her ankles. The boot trackers she and Leandro had hidden in her heels days ago should still be working. A precaution that had seemed almost paranoid at the time, now her best hope. The heavy metal door she'd kicked through slammed open again. Ronaldo stepped onto the roof, his pristine apron now splattered with water from the electrified floor. 2 guards flanked him, guns drawn. Across town, Leandro's SUV screamed through the streets, tires fighting for grip on the icy pavement. His hands flew in sharp commands to Bastian in the passenger seat, coordinating their approach. The tablet between them showed 2 steady dots moving across the city grid. Greta's boot trackers, leading them straight to her. Leandro's face was a mask of controlled fury as he took another corner too fast, the SUV's back end sliding before the tires caught. He had known Ronaldo would make a move eventually. The old snake couldn't resist trying to maintain his grip on the family through manipulation and pain. But taking Greta, that was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The tracker signal pulsed stronger now. They were getting close. Behind them, 3 more SUVs full of Leandro's most trusted men followed, ready to rain hell on whoever stood between them and Greta. Bastian's hands moved in rapid sign. 5 minutes out! Teams in position! Leandro gave a sharp nod, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Though, sleet was getting heavier, but he could see the warehouse district's edges now. Somewhere in that maze of buildings, Greta was fighting for survival. She'd already proven herself clever and resourceful. The electrocution trick would buy her time. Now she just had to hold on until he got there. The SUV fishtailed again as they took the final turn, but Leandro controlled the slide with practiced ease. The tracker signal was strongest yet. They were almost there. Almost to her. Through the slaughterhouse's dim corridors, Leandro moved like a shadow made steel. His steps were silent on the wet concrete, each movement precise and lethal. The scent of old blood and bleach hung thick in the air, but his focus remained razor sharp. 2 guards emerged from a side room. They never had time to raise their weapons. Leandro's hands found pressure points and vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Bodies crumpled without sound. He refused to waste energy on men who had helped take what was his. Bastian ghosted through parallel corridors, systematically clearing stairwells. His hand signals confirmed each section secured. The rest of their small team spread through the building's arteries, blocking exits and escape routes. Above, wind howled across the roof. Greta's back pressed against the low wall as Ronaldo advanced, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled from the chaos below. His 2 remaining guards flanked him, weapons trained on her. Such spirit, Ronaldo said, lips curling into a cruel smile. But spirit can be broken. Ask his father. He understood that control starts early. He stepped closer, making sure his mouth was clearly visible as he formed each word. Like father. The taunt hung in the frigid air between them. Ronaldo's eyes glittered with malicious triumph. Your precious Leandro was shaped before birth, he continued. His father knew a deaf heir would be easier to guide, to control. The prenatal tonic was quite effective, though perhaps too much, since it left him completely silent rather than merely docile. He shrugged elegantly. But then that particular trait runs true in their line. The need to dominate, to shape their sons into proper tools. Greta's fingers tightened on the cattle prod. Her heart hammered, but her voice remained steady. You're wrong about him. Am I? He's his father's son. Violence and control wrapped in expensive suits. The only difference is the depth of his silence. The roof access door opened soundlessly behind Ronaldo. Leandro emerged like a predator from shadow, death in every line of his body. His eyes found Greta first, checking for injuries, memorizing every detail of her condition. She saw her moment. The prod crackled to life in her hands, electric blue sparks dancing, not to attack, but to force Ronaldo's men to step back instinctively from the threat of shock. That split second of distraction was all Leandro needed. He moved with terrible grace. The first guard's gun went flying, as tendons and bones gave way under precise pressure. The second barely had time to turn before a strike to the throat dropped him gasping. Ronaldo tried to back away, but Leandro was faster, his hand locked around the older man's throat, fingers positioned to snap bone with a single twist. Decades of rage and betrayal burned in his eyes. But Greta stepped forward, hands moving in deliberate signs. Don't let him write your ending! The words cut through Leandro's fury like a blade of ice. His grip tightened fractionally as the choice crystallized. Quick death versus lasting leverage. Information versus vengeance. being his father's echo or forging a different path. His hands moved from Ronaldo's throat to pressure points that brought the older man to his knees. Zip ties appeared, binding wrists and ankles while blood trickled from Ronaldo's split lip. Bastian and two others emerged onto the roof, moving efficiently to secure the scene. They loaded the unconscious guards and their zip-tied boss into the waiting van for transport to a secure location. Questions would be asked later, in controlled conditions where every answer could be verified. Leandro shrugged out of his wool coat, wrapping it around Greta's shoulders. His hands cupped her face, thumbs gently checking the cut on her scalp. Satisfaction flickered in his eyes when he found no serious damage. Without warning, he swept her into his arms. She started to protest but felt the minute tremors running through his muscles, the need to hold her close, to verify her safety through touch. So she relaxed against his chest as he carried her down the stairs, trusting his sure steps in the dim light. The SUV's interior was warm and quiet. 30 minutes later, the city sliding past in a blur of wet streets and neon. Leandro's fingers traced words against her palm. I choose my own path, not his echo. Greta laced her fingers through his, both of them knowing that tonight had shifted something fundamental. Ronaldo's taunts about fathers and sons had tried to write an ending in blood and revenge. But they had chosen a different story, one of leverage over fury, of breaking cycles rather than repeating them. Leandro's other hand moved in precise signs. The old games end now. His eyes held hers, full of promise and steel. We make new rules. The city lights painted shadows across his face as they drove, but his touch remained gentle on her skin. Deadly hands choosing tenderness, a silent king writing his own story in a language of protection rather than control. Behind them, Bastian followed with their prisoner, but Leandro's focus remained on Greta, on the warmth of her hand in his, on the future they would forge together. Rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of sleet. In the back of the SUV, Leandro pulled Greta closer, his body curled around hers like a shield. His fingers spelled promises against her skin while his eyes watched the city scroll past, alert for any threat to what was his, not through his father's methods of control, but through choice and trust and carefully directed power. The warehouse district fell away behind them as they headed toward the estate. Ahead lay questioning sessions, information to extract, networks to dismantle. But for now, in this quiet moment, Leandro held what mattered most. The woman who had shown him that silence could be strength rather than weakness, that love didn't require sound to shake foundations. Morning light filtered through the clinic's blinds as Dr. Hart finished the last suture on Greta's scalp. The local anesthetic dulled the sting, but Greta remained acutely aware of Leandro's presence beside her, his hand steady on her knee. The cut's clean, Dr. Hart said, signing simultaneously for Leandro's benefit. No signs of concussion, but we'll monitor for the next 24 hours. Bastian appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Ronaldo's ready to talk. Leandro's jaw tightened, but his touch on Greta's knee remained gentle. He signed quickly. Stay here. Rest. No, Greta replied, both in voice and sign. I need to see this through. The interrogation room, 3 floors below, felt like a tomb. Ronaldo sat handcuffed to a steel chair, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. His usual smooth facade had cracked, revealing the desperate man beneath. Over the next 2 hours, Ronaldo spilled everything. Access codes to offshore accounts, names of compromised officials, locations of blackmail material. Most crucially, he provided proof that the surveillance footage showing Bastian's supposed betrayal had been digitally fabricated, a sophisticated deepfake meant to fracture house loyalty. Dr. Hart returned mid-afternoon, clearing her throat softly. Don Vitale, if I may. She hesitated, then continued. Given recent revelations about your father's actions, I feel obligated to mention there are options. Modern cochlear implants. Leandro's hand shot up, cutting her off. His eyes found Greta's face, studying her expression for a long moment. His fingers moved deliberately. My choice, my terms, not theirs. Greta nodded, understanding the weight of this moment. This wasn't about fixing what others saw as broken. It was about reclaiming stolen agency. The afternoon brought a different kind of reckoning. Armed with Ronaldo's evidence, Leandro confronted the old guard, his father's former allies who had perpetuated decades of toxic control. Some tried to pledge new loyalty, falling to their knees in theatrical displays of submission. Others made desperate breaks for exits only to find Bastian's men waiting. Greta watched it all from Leandro's side, her presence a reminder of why this purge mattered. This wasn't just about power. It was about reshaping a system that had weaponized vulnerability, that had tried to engineer weakness through medical manipulation. By evening, the estate hummed with controlled tension as news spread of the day's events. Greta sat in Leandro's office, watching him draft new protocols on his tablet. His fingers moved across the screen with precision, outlining rules that would protect rather than exploit. The cleaning staff will have guaranteed health care, he signed, showing her the document. Security details for family members of key personnel, clear channels for reporting abuse without fear of retaliation. Greta leaned closer, adding her own suggestions. Protection for whistleblowers, educational funds for employees' children, regular independent audits of medical facilities. The sky outside deepened to indigo as they worked, city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Leandro paused, his hands hovering over the tablet. He turned to face Greta fully, his expression intense. His fingers traced words across her palm. If I choose to hear, the first sound I want is you. Greta's heart squeezed. She spoke aloud, knowing he could read her lips. I'm not afraid of your silence. She took his hand, pressing it to her chest so he could feel her heartbeat. And I'm not afraid of your thunder. Leandro nodded once, decision made. He typed quickly on his phone, showing her the screen. A surgery date, 2 weeks out. Time enough for her bruises to fade, for security to be reinforced, for them both to be ready for whatever came next. Dr. Hart had left detailed information about the procedure, success rates, recovery time, adaptation periods. But those clinical details felt secondary to the larger truth. This was about choice, about taking back what had been stolen before birth. Bastian knocked softly, entering with updated security reports. The last pockets of resistance had been contained. Ronaldo's network was unraveling as compromised officials rushed to cut deals. The house was secure. Leandro reviewed the reports while Greta organized the new governance documents. Together, they were building something different, a structure of protection rather than exploitation, of earned loyalty rather than enforced submission. The clock approached midnight as they finished. Greta's scalp ached dully, but she felt settled, centered. They had survived Ronaldo's schemes, exposed decades of manipulation, and emerged stronger. Leandro's hand found hers in the dim office, his touch saying everything words couldn't. Whatever came next, silence or sound, thunder or whispers, they would face it together, on their terms, writing their own story in a language of choice and trust and carefully tended love. The 2 weeks after Ronaldo's fall settled into a rhythm of preparation and change. The first 3 nights, Greta maintained her post in the anteroom, but something had shifted in their dynamic. Each evening, Leandro would linger in the doorway between their spaces, his fingers spelling out pieces of his day against her palm until exhaustion pulled them apart. On the 4th night, when Greta rose to retreat to her cot, Leandro caught her wrist. His hands moved with deliberate care. Stay! It wasn't an order, but an invitation. That night, she slept curled against his side, his heartbeat a steady drum under her cheek. Bastian drove himself to exhaustion, coordinating teams that swept every Vitale property. They found surveillance equipment in wine cellars, money trails hidden in charitable foundations, and a network of compromised staff that stretched back decades. Each discovery validated Leandro's decision to remake his father's empire. Dr. Hart's preliminary tests revealed encouraging news. Leandro's auditory nerves were healthy, untouched by the prenatal toxin that had targeted his cochlear structures. The implant should have excellent conductivity, she explained, her hands moving in tandem with her words. Your brain will do the rest. Greta's brother, Marco, was found in a grimy betting parlor, barely conscious and drowning in markers. Bastian's men extracted him personally, delivering him to a private rehabilitation facility where armed guards ensured both his safety and compliance. Greta visited daily, watching color return to his hollow cheeks. The morning of surgery arrived with crystalline clarity, sunlight shattering off fresh frost. Leandro sat on the edge of the hospital bed in a thin gown, but his bearing remained regal. His hands danced with playful signs. Maybe I'll wake up speaking Italian. Greta swatted his arm, grateful for his attempt to lighten her mood. You're terrible. You love it, he signed back, then grew serious. No matter what happens, we already have our language. The surgery itself was textbook perfect. Hart's team placed the internal component with precision, and Leandro was back in his room by afternoon, groggy but alert. Recovery from the procedure was immediate, though the device remained inactive, waiting for healing before the external processor could be fitted. That first week was strange. A liminal space between what was and what would be. Leandro's world remained silent as always, but now that silence felt pregnant with possibility. They developed new routines, mapping their shared space through touch and light. Greta learned to telegraph her movements with subtle shifts in air pressure, letting Leandro track her presence without sight. He taught her the private language of his family's signs, passed down through generations of Vitales. They built their own dialect of gesture and gaze, preparing for whatever changes sound might bring. Bastian maintained heightened security, though the threats had largely subsided. Ronaldo's network was dismantled, his co-conspirators either jailed or turned informant. The house settled into new patterns of authority, with Leandro's reforms taking root. 3 weeks after surgery, they gathered in Hart's office for the external processor fitting. The device was sleek and modern, barely visible behind Leandro's ear. Hart ran through the activation protocol again, stressing patience. "The first impressions will be mechanical," she explained, signing as she spoke. "Your brain needs time to interpret the signals as meaningful sound. Some patients describe it as beeps or static initially." Leandro nodded, his expression calm but his fingers tight around Greta's. He'd waited 30 years. He could handle a few more minutes of silence. The office was carefully prepared. Sound-dampened walls, minimal equipment. Nothing to overwhelm new auditory input. The wall clock ticked steadily toward 6:17 p.m., each movement bringing them closer to the moment of change. Greta positioned herself directly in Leandro's line of sight, close enough that he could read every nuance of her expression. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Ready," he signed, never taking his eyes from her face. Dr. Hart's hand hovered over the activation switch, waiting for Leandro's final nod. The moment stretched like honey, sweet with anticipation and possibility. In the quiet room, Greta could hear her own heartbeat, wondering if it would be among the first sounds Leandro would learn to recognize. The wall clock's second hand swept forward, marking time's steady march towards 6:17 p.m. Greta leaned closer, ensuring her lips would be the first thing Leandro saw when sound entered his world for the first time. His fingers tangled with hers, spelling out 3 words against her skin. "Love you always." Hart's hand remained poised above the switch, waiting for that perfect moment when time and technology and trust would converge, ready to open a door that had been locked since before Leandro's first breath. The office held its collective breath, witnesses to this intimate revolution about to unfold in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The small click of activation changed everything. A strange metallic sound washed through Leandro's consciousness, thin and artificial, like nothing he'd imagined in his silent dreams. His eyes widened slightly, but he kept his gaze fixed on Greta's face, anchoring himself in the familiar as his world transformed. Greta's lips moved, shaping his name in a whisper. "Leandro." The sound was mechanical, processed, but the tenderness in it struck him like a physical force. His throat worked as emotion crashed through him, and a laugh escaped, rough and unpracticed, but filled with wonder. His first spoken word emerged imperfect but determined. "Mine." Dr. Hart began the careful calibration process, adjusting levels while monitoring Leandro's reactions. Greta sat close, reading simple sentences from cards while Hart fine-tuned the settings. "The sky is blue, water flows, birds fly." Each phrase brought new discoveries, the soft sibilance of "es," the way W rolled differently than R. When Greta began to hum, something simple and without melody, Leandro closed his eyes. The sound wrapped around him like an embrace, making their private world complete, in a way he hadn't known was missing. "How does it feel?" Hart signed and spoke, simultaneously. Leandro considered, his hands moving deliberately. "Like learning a new language, but one my body already knows." They worked through the afternoon, mapping this new territory of sound. Leandro discovered his own voice, deeper than he'd imagined, still uncertain in its cadence. He practiced simple words between adjustments, each attempt more controlled than the last. Back at the estate that evening, Leandro explored the processor's controls. He found power in choosing, activating sound for intimate moments with Greta, returning to familiar silence when strategy required focused observation. The ability to move between worlds became its own kind of strength. In their bedroom, he experimented with sound and silence while Greta spoke, comparing how her words felt in his different states of being. With the processor on, her voice carried warmth and music. With it off, her hands danced their familiar ballet of meaning. Both were equally precious. "Tell me something," he signed, processor temporarily disabled. Greta's fingers flew. "I love how you're embracing this on your terms." He switched the processor on to hear her laugh, a sound that was quickly becoming his favorite. No one else ever gave me that choice before. The next evening, the estate gathered for a quiet celebration. Greta had arranged everything perfectly. Simple foods that wouldn't clatter, staff who understood the delicate balance of sound and silence. The dining room glowed with candlelight, faces bright with shared joy. Leandro stood, commanding attention without sound. His hands moved first, signing words he'd practiced carefully. Then, his voice followed, unpracticed but determined. To those who see with hands, he said, the words slightly uneven but clear, and hear with hearts. The room lifted their glasses in response, a forest of silent approval. Greta's eyes shone with pride and something deeper, something that had nothing to do with sound or silence and everything to do with love. After dinner, she led him onto the dark terrace. Distant fireworks punctuated the night sky, their percussive thumps carrying across the city. Leandro watched the colors bloom, feeling the vibrations through the stone railing. With deliberate motion, he reached up and switched off the processor. In the returned silence, Greta turned to face him. Her lips shaped 3 words. I love you. He didn't need sound to understand their meaning. He'd never needed it. The choice to hear was a gift, but loving her was as essential as breathing. He pulled her close, their heartbeats synchronizing in a rhythm that transcended sound. They stood together in the velvet dark, watching colors paint the sky. Sometimes Leandro activated the processor to hear Greta's soft commentary on particularly beautiful bursts. Sometimes he left it off, reading her joy in the squeeze of her hand and the curve of her smile. When the final firework faded, they lingered on the terrace. The night settled. Around them, like a familiar blanket, comfortable in its quiet, Leandro traced patterns on Greta's palm, not signs exactly, but a private code of touch they'd developed during their weeks together. The estate hummed with life behind them, guards at their posts, staff cleaning up from dinner, the everyday rhythm of their world continuing unchanged. Yet everything was different now, richer for having choices where once there had been only constraints. Greta shifted in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers mapped his features the way they had that first night in the panic room, when touch and silence had forged their initial bond. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, grateful that some things would never need translation. Morning light slanted through the cellar's high windows, casting harsh shadows across Ronaldo's bruised face. He sat at a metal table, hands trembling as he signed document after document. Each signature transferred another piece of his empire to Leandro's control. Greta stood in the corner, her tablet recording every transaction. Her fingers flew across the screen, documenting account numbers, property deeds, and shell company transfers. Nothing would be left to rumor or memory. The manufacturing plant in Milan, Leandro signed, his movements sharp and precise. All of it. Ronaldo's pen scratched across paper. His once immaculate suit hung loose on his frame, spotted with dried blood. He hadn't bothered fighting after the first day. Survival instinct had won over pride. The charity foundation, too, Greta added softly. Every shell account. Leandro nodded, his face carved from stone. He'd removed his processor for this, preferring silence while he dismantled the network that had stolen his choices before birth. Above them, Bastion coordinated teams to secure each location as ownership transferred. Warehouses, clinics, private offices, anywhere the prenatal fortifier might have touched. They found records going back decades, lists of desperate mothers who'd been fed poison disguised as hope. Through the morning, Greta photographed each document, created backup copies, established paper trails that couldn't be erased. Her grandmother had taught her more than just ASL. She'd learned the importance of keeping receipts. By afternoon, they moved to the estate's main office. Greta drafted new protection protocols for civilian staff. No more using kitchen workers as unwitting spies. No more threatening drivers' families. No more forcing medical staff to choose between ethics and survival. Make it clear, Leandro signed. Anyone who pressures civilian staff answers to me. Bastion stood at parade rest nearby, nodding as Greta outlined enforcement guidelines. He would be her sword arm in this, ensuring the new rules had teeth. Through the week, Leandro and Greta fell into rhythm with his dual worlds of sound and silence. During strategy meetings, he wore the processor, tracking multiple voices, while watching for micro-expressions that betrayal taught him to catch. At night, he removed it, preferring the quiet intimacy of touch and sign. They developed their own language of safety. 3 quick taps meant danger, 2 slow ones meant clear. 1 long press said, I love you. It worked whether the processor was on or off, whether they could see each other's hands or not. Greta's new role as steward felt natural, like stepping into shoes that had been waiting. She moved through the estate with quiet authority, her clipboard replaced by a tablet, her uniform exchanged for tailored business wear that celebrated her curves instead of hiding them. Staff who had once dismissed her now sought her counsel. She mediated disputes, allocated resources, and made sure everyone understood the new order. Civilian staff were to be protected, not exploited. On Friday morning, Dr. Hart arrived with a thick folder of forensic reports. She spread documents across Leandro's desk, chemical analyses, bank transfers, internal memos. The evidence formed an unbreakable chain from Ronaldo's labs to the Fortifier program, and finally to an authorization bearing Leandro's father's signature. "It's conclusive," Hart said, speaking and signing simultaneously. "The formula was designed specifically to target auditory development in utero. Your father authorized its use on your mother." Leandro's hands were steady as he examined each page. This wasn't tragedy anymore. It was ammunition for change. Greta stepped close, her shoulder brushing his. "How do you want to handle the announcement?" He considered, then signed. "Full disclosure, everything comes to light." They worked through the evening in his study, drafting and redrafting the public statement. Greta's laptop glowed as she shaped their message. Acknowledgement of past wrongs, commitment to change, establishment of restitution funds for affected families. Bastian brought reports of secured properties, Hart delivered medical records, and Greta wove it all together into a document that would rewrite their world's rules. Near midnight, Leandro stood at the window, processor off, watching city lights shimmer. Greta approached with the final draft, her tablet screen illuminating her face in the dim room. He read through it one last time. The statement pulled no punches. It named names, cited evidence, and laid out consequences. But it also offered hope, medical support for affected families, protection for whistleblowers, clear lines between business and brutality. Greta set the tablet aside and turned to face him. In the soft light, her eyes held the same steady courage that had made her tackle a strange man behind a marble pillar all those weeks ago. Leandro traced her cheek with gentle fingers before signing. "You changed everything." She shook her head, hands moving in response. "We changed everything. Together." He pulled her close, one hand sliding into her hair as their lips met. The kiss tasted like victory, like justice, like the end of a storm that had raged for 30 years. Tomorrow they would release their statement and face whatever came next. But tonight, in the quiet dark of his study, they had already won. 6 months after Ronaldo's fall, spring painted the Vitale estate in soft pastels. Cherry blossoms drifted like snow, gentler than the blizzard that had first thrown Greta and Leandro together. White tents dotted the gardens where community leaders, medical staff, and neighbors gathered to celebrate the launch of 3 new clinics and 2 domestic violence shelters, all funded by seized Ronaldo assets. These months had brought steady change. Territory disputes settled into stable agreements. Greta's brother Mark completed rehab and now worked with addiction counselors at one of the new facilities. Dr. Hart's expanded medical practice operated under fortress-grade security, treating civilians without fear of exploitation. Greta moved through the crowd in a navy dress that celebrated her curves, tablet in hand, as she coordinated staff and caterers. She paused to watch Leandro address their guests, his processor on for public speaking, but his hands still moving in elegant ASL, a bridge between his worlds. "Today marks not just new buildings," he said, voice growing more confident with each public appearance, "but new foundations. My house stands with those who protect the vulnerable." He nodded to the assembled clinic staff, social workers, and community advocates. "Your courage makes our strength mean something." Bastian appeared at the garden's edge, leading 2 rescue dogs, a project Greta had championed after finding them abandoned near one of Ronaldo's old properties. The smaller one, a scrappy terrier mix, wriggled free of its ceremonial ribbon and trotted straight to Leandro, sitting at his feet with complete confidence. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The dog's certainty about where it belonged reflected what everyone had come to understand. The Vitale house had transformed into a force for protection rather than fear. Greta knelt to scratch behind the dog's ears while Leandro continued his speech. She remembered those first days, the terror and tenderness, the way they'd learned to read each other without sound. Now they moved in perfect sync, whether he wore the processor or not. The afternoon flowed into evening. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees as guests departed. Medical staff chatted with security teams, social workers traded cards with estate personnel, and the boundaries between worlds grew softer. Near sunset, Greta found herself in that same service corridor where she'd first tackled Leandro during the attack. The memory was sharp. The silent alarm, the gunfire, the split-second choice to protect a stranger. Now the hallway glowed warm, and no danger lurked in its shadows. She touched Leandro's arm. "Should we have sound or silence for our private toast?" He studied her face in the gentle light, then reached up to switch off his processor. In this moment, he chose their first language, the one that had saved his life, the one that had brought them together. His fingers traced her cheek before signing. "The quiet is ours." They walked hand in hand to their private sitting room where champagne waited. The dogs followed, making themselves at home on a plush rug while Greta poured 2 glasses. She lifted hers in a toast, mouthing "I love you," with the same clarity she'd used to sign down all those months ago. Leandro's spoken forever carried the slight imperfection of one who learned speech late, but his eyes held absolute certainty. His hands moved in parallel, signing the word with fluid grace, voice and silence united in one truth. The estate settled around them like a living thing. Through the windows, they could see Bastian doing final security checks, Hart's car pulling away from the clinic, and staff members heading home under the protection of new protocols. Their bedroom waited up the curved stair, but they lingered in this moment. Leandro set his glass down and pulled Greta close. One hand splayed across her back, while the other traced letters against her palm. M-I-N-E. She answered by tapping their danger code against his chest. 3 quick beats, then their all-clear signal, 2 slow ones, and finally their love sign. 1 long press. He laughed silently, remembering how they developed that system. The dogs sprawled by the fireplace, secure in their rescued state. Staff moved efficiently through evening routines, protected by clear rules and clearer consequences. In the clinic basement, Hart's team organized files for tomorrow's patients. Every piece aligned. Danger turned outward, tenderness turned in, and between them all, the promise of something better. Leandro's processor sat on its charging dock, a tool rather than a necessity. He could choose sound or silence, moving between worlds as needed, but never again would anyone make that choice for him. His hands found Greta's in the soft light, spelling out their shared future letter by letter. Their story had begun with violence and schemes, with manipulation and fear, but they'd forged something new from those shadows. A love fierce enough to protect, controlled enough to choose, and safe within its own carefully drawn lines. The evening settled into gentle rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, territories to manage, clinics to run, boundaries to defend. But tonight belonged to them, to the language they'd built between danger and desire, to the future they would shape together. Spring breeze carried cherry blossoms past their window like nature's own celebration. The estate hummed with quiet purpose, its transformed heart beating in time with their own. Here, in this space between public power and private peace, they had written new rules for their world: protection for the vulnerable, consequences for the cruel, and at its center, a love that needed no sound to shake the earth.